I woke to the distant roar of the manufacturer's sirens, a mournful call that signalled another shift change in Hive Volgatis. Dawn never truly came here in the lower levels, only a sickly glow from the lumen strips overhead, flickering behind layers of smog. My hab unit was a cramped cell in a towering block where thousands of us slept stacked above one another. I lay on my cot for a moment, listening to the constant thrum of machinery through the rock-creaked walls. Another day in the Emperor's glorious Imperium. I fought wearily, rubbing the grit of half-remembered nightmares from my eyes. 3 quick clangs reverberated from the pipes, the morning ration alert. I pulled myself up, bones aching from yesterday's labours in the clinic, and slipped into a threadbare grey jumpsuit. At the door, a rusted servitor dispenser spat out a tin of corpse starch grot. The label was faded, but I didn't need to read it to know the contents. Bland, grey, nutrient paste, made from reclaimed biomatter. I cracked the tin and grimaced at the odour of cold, greasy porridge. Every hiver in the lower blocks knew that smell. We ate the dead to keep on living, whether we liked to think about it or not. I took a few bites as I gathered my satchel. The paste coated my tongue with a chalky residue. No matter how many years I've endured it, the taste never improves. Still, it was fuel. I washed it down with a mouthful of recycle water from the tap, trying not to imagine what runoff from the spire filters might be in it. The Emperor provides. They taught us in the Ministerum, scholar, usually said over a scant meal like this, but it was hard to feel grateful chewing on the remains of forgotten citizens compacted into a meal. My name is Marus, and I serve as a Medicae in this hive, one of countless minor functionaries trying to hold the tide of death at bay. Hive Volgatis has been my whole world since birth. I have never seen the sky, and likely never will. They say in the upper spires, the lucky few bask in real sunlight and bathe air that doesn't reek of ozone or decay. Down here in the mid-hive, the air recyclers give us second-hand breaths laced with a pollutant tang. Most days I barely notice it. Today, however, a bitter scent cut through the usual industrial odour as I left my hab. The acrid tinge of burned promethium and something else, something coppery. Stepping out into the hab block corridor, I nearly collided with a pair of enforcers dragging a limp body. A man, or what was left of him, dangled between them, his boots scraping the rusty floor panels. Dark crimson streaks trailed behind, and I realised the coppery smell was blood. My stomach lurched at the sudden metallic tang in the air. Another one from the Factorum line, grunted one of the enforcers when he noticed my wide eyes. The enforcer's face was hidden behind a visored helmet, expression unreadable as he hefted the body. Back to work, citizen. Move along. He jerked his chin, gesturing for me to step aside. I pressed myself against the wall to let him past. My heart pounded against my ribs. Death was common in Volgatis. Industrial accidents, gang skirmishes, overwork, sickness. I'd seen it all at the clinic. Yet, something about this corpse made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way the enforcers hurried, as if eager to get rid of him. Or the twisted angle of the victim's limbs. I only caught a glimpse, but the man's eyes were open, frozen in a look of abject terror. Before I could dwell on it, a vox speaker crackled to life overhead. Attention citizens, work shift 438A begins in 15 minutes. All loiterers will be punished. The Emperor protects. The announcement echoed through the corridor as dozens of my neighbours shuffled out of their cells and into the walkway. merging into a stream of drab figures illuminated by flickering yellow lumens. I joined the flow, descending iron stairs toward the transit rails. Normally, I would head straight to St. Lohan's clinic where I served, but the enforcers hauling the body had unsettled me. Instead, on impulse, I trailed a short distance behind them. I wasn't scheduled at the clinic for another hour, and if someone was hurt, perhaps I could help. Or perhaps morbid curiosity tugged at me. That frightened expression on the dead man's face wouldn't leave my mind. They led me down 2 levels, past the rows of massive pipes rattling with steam. We entered a chamber I recognised as one of the precinct outposts for the local enforcer patrol. 2 more helmeted officers stood guard at the door. I hesitated outside, pretending to check the contents of my Medicae satchel while stealing glances. The enforcers carrying the corpse laid it on a slab inside. One removed its helmet, revealing a scarred, bald head, beaded with sweat. "Call the Medicae," I heard him mutter. "I'm already here," I said, stepping forward before I lost my nerve. I swung my satchel into a view as proof. Medicaid Maris Trell, from St. Lohan's Clinic. "I saw you bringing someone in. Did you need assistance?" The bald enforcer narrowed his eyes at me, clearly weighing if he should just shove me back into the hallway. After a beat, he jerked his thumb for me to enter. "Fine. Inside. Emperor knows our own medics take their damn time." Inside the precinct's bare concrete room, the body lay on a metal exam slab, under harsh white lumen strips. I swallowed as I moved closer. It was a middle-aged man in a factory worker's coveralls, stained black with soot, except where they were soaked red. His chest, Emperor have mercy, it looked like it had been partially crushed and torn open. I forced myself to breathe through my mouth to avoid gagging at the stench of blood and offal. I set my satchel down and pulled on a pair of stained latex gloves. My hands were already trembling. Calm, I told myself, drawing on my training. I've seen bad industrial accidents before, but even as I probed gingerly around the massive wound, doubt gnawed at me. "This came from the Factorum presses?" I asked quietly. The chest cavity was a ruin. Ribs jutted out like snapped iron rods. If a heavy loader or press machine had done this, it should have simply crushed everything. But here, it looked more like something had ripped the rib cage apart from the inside out. One of the enforcers answered. "Found him in the Reclamator, Sector 16, near the sump vats. Looks like he wandered someplace he shouldn't have gone himself. Pulped." The others didn't say anything. I leaned closer to the corpse, examining the edges of the wound. They were deep gouges in the flesh. My metal cogitator, an old handheld Auspex, could double as a basic forensic scanner. I waved it over the body. The screen flickered, unable to make sense of the damage. There was no machine oil or metal fragments I could see. Odd. If he'd been caught in gears. Instead, a thought chilled me. These looked like fingernail scratches on the inside of his arms, as if the man had clawed at himself, or something had clawed out of him. My mouth felt dry. I realized the enforcer was watching me. I cleared my throat. "Cause of death appears to be massive trauma," I said neutrally. "If he fell into a grinder or got stuck in a pipe surge, it could look like this." The bald enforcer grunted. "Right. Another sump rat. Learning Darwin's law." He reached over and pulled a stained sheet over the corpse without ceremony. "We'll file it as accidental. No need to waste the arbitrator's time. An open and shut case." I knew the drill. Paperwork was the enemy of the enforcers. If they could label a death as an accident, it saved them trouble. Part of me wanted to object. Nothing about these wounds felt like an ordinary accident, but I caught the other gaze of the officer, a cold, warning glance. He didn't like me, here, asking questions. I removed my gloves and stepped back. I'll write a preliminary report for the clinic's records as well, I offered quietly. My voice sounded hollow to my ears. Fine. We'll send for the body pickup from the mortuary guild, the enforcer said. He was already more interested in wiping the blood off of his boots than in the dead man's identity. To them, one worker, more or less, didn't matter. I felt the precinct house, stomach rolling. The corridor outside was bustling now with Hive block residents, heading to their stations. None of them met my eyes as I paused against the wall to steady myself. I pressed a fist to my mouth, fighting a wave of nausea. In my years of Medicaid, I had seen hundreds of corpses, but never one that unsettled me like this. Accident. I tried to convince myself, just a particular gruesome accident. Yet I couldn't banish the image of those jagged wounds, and if some wild animal had torn the man open. But what animal could be loose in the hive guts? Perhaps a sump croc? Or a mutant from the underhive tunnels? Occasionally things did crawl up from below. Yes, that was plausible. The idea gave me little comfort, though. A rogue mutant attacking workers in the lower levels was hardly better than a malfunctioning machine. Either way, something deadly lurked where it shouldn't. As I made my way to the clinic, the hive around me came to life in all its brutal routine. I passed under a rusted Aquila icon hanging above the transit station entrance, crusted with decades of soot. A chime sounded, and recorded prayer droned from unseen vox horns. In service we find our faith. In suffering we find our glory. Praise be the Emperor, master of mankind. Dozens of citizens around me echoed the last line, their voices dull and rote. I mouthed the words as well, not doing so would draw unwanted attention from the clerics, or, worse, informants. The reminder of faith was meant to be comforting, but all I felt was the weight of the Emperor's eyes, or rather, those of his ever-watchful enforcers, on our backs. I caught the rail towards St. Lawrence Clinic, trying to shake off the morning's events. The carriage was packed with workers in oil-stained uniforms, a few ministrum novices in threadbare robes, and servitors standing motionless until their destination cogitators pinged. I stood pressed between a coughing elderly woman and a barrel-chested foundryman, each absorbed in their own misery. Overhead, a flickering holograph display played a looping newsreel. Production quotas up 2% this quarter. Praise the Adeptus Administrum. Beware of sedition. Report any suspicious behaviour to the Adeptus Arbites. I closed my eyes, wishing I could purge the memory of that corpse from my mind, but behind my eyelids I saw it again. The raw red ruin. The fingers stiffened in their last despairing reach, and those eyes full of terror. There was something in that terror that felt aware. Not the blank shock of an accident victim, but the horror of someone who was something coming for them. The rail screeched to a halt. I opened my eyes to find we had arrived at the clinic stop. I disembarked with the crowd, heart heavy. I did not know it then, but this morning was the first hint of a nightmare that had only begun to unfurl. In the depths of Hive Volgatis, something truly evil had awoken, and though I was just a simple Medicaid, I would soon find myself entwined in its awful purpose. I arrived at St. Lohan's clinic, still carrying the weight of that morning's horrors. The clinic itself was a modest facility wedged between habstacks and a tangle of pipework. Inside, the halls were already crowded. Injured workers sat on benches, clutching minor wounds, and the air reeked of antiseptic over sweat. A cracked mural of St. Lohans, a long-dead Medicae martyr, watched over the waiting area with fading eyes. "Maris," a familiar voice called from down the corridor. Nurse Sabina hurried toward me, her boots tapping on the tainted tiles. She was a slight woman, with a sharp face, softened eyes, one of the few genuine souls in the godforsaken hive. I had known Sabina since our apprentice days. She could read my expressions like a book. Emperor, I must have looked awful, because her brow seized the moment she neared. What happened? You're paler. As a spectre? I hesitated. Discussing anything unusual openly was dangerous. Walls had ears, and talk of mutants or monsters could invite the Inquisition or worse. But Sabina and I had no secrets. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. On my way here, I saw an enforcer team hauling in a body. Industrial accident, they claimed. But, Sabina, it was like unlike anything I'd ever seen. Almost like something attacked him, ripped him apart. Her eyes widened in alarm. She glanced around to ensure no patients were listening. Emperor's mercy, are you sure? People say things crawl up from the underhive sometimes. The unease in her voice mirrored my own. I'm not sure of anything, I admitted, swallowing. Just voicing my doubt made feel like the floor was unsteady. The enforcers didn't want to investigate, wrote it off quick. Maybe I'm just imagining things. I don't sleep well, nightmares, and I trailed off, realizing I was blabbing. Sabina touched my arm gently. Take a breath. You've been pulling double shifts all week. Could just be exhaustion talking. Before I could respond, the clinic's chief bellowed down the hallway. Medicae, we have incoming. Burn trauma from the refinery. I snapped into professional mode, pushing my worries aside. Duty calls, I muttered to Sabina. She nodded, already moving to grab a medikit. 2 orderlies rushed in, bearing a man on a stretcher. His face was a mask of agony, red and blistered from a chemical burn. I smelled promethium and scorched flesh as they set him on a gurney. Immediately I took over, directing the orderlies to fetch saline and unguents. Sabina helped cut away the remnants of the man's melted worksuit. For the next hour, the clinic claimed all my attention. We treated a string of wounded labourers, a broken arm here, a lost finger there, fevers and toxic inhalations, the never-ending tapestry of hive industries, triage and suture, bone wrap and counterseptic. The tasks became an autopilot routine, pushing aside the morning's dark thoughts. By the time the queue of patients thinned, I was bone-tired. Sabina handed me a cup of recaf, the bitter, stimulant brew, lukewarm but welcome. Thanks, I sighed, leaning against the wall near our supply shelves. My arms ached from holding down a delirious fever patient earlier. You need to take a break, Sabina said softly, concerned still etched on her features. I can cover the next hour if you want to catch a breath outside. Maybe you're right. The clinic's claustrophobic air, heavy with illness and disinfectant, was stifling. A few minutes outside might clear my head. I nodded appreciatively. Clasping the recaf mug, I stepped out a side door into a narrow alley behind the clinic. Overhead, great pipes vented steam and smog upward, briefly enveloping me in a warm mist. Beyond that, the hive's constant skyline of girders and ramps crisscrossed under the distant ceiling. This alley was relatively quiet, A small mercy. I sipped the bitter recaf and tried to let my mind go blank, but inevitably the memory of the morning's corpse crept back. The questions I'd suppressed while working now clamoured for attention. If it wasn't an accident, what could have done that to the man? A mutant? A cult ritual? My skin prickled at the thought of forbidden cults. They were a reality in Hive cities despite the Imperium's harsh penalties. People turned to dark powers out of desperation or madness. I prayed that wasn't the case here. A sudden clatter snapped me from my thoughts. Farther, down the alley, behind a dumpster unit, something moved. I stiffened, heart thudding. "Hello," I said quietly. For a long second there was only the dip of condensation from pipes. I was about to shrug it off when a hunched figure emerged from behind the bin. An aged hiver, draped in tattered rags. One of the countless destitute who slipped through the cracks of the administration records. A beggar, not a threat. He shuffled forward, palm out. "Alms, please?" His voice was a dry croak. The half mask over his mouth indicated he was likely a sump dweller, someone who'd been exiled or wandered up from the Underhive. Though, the grime. I saw raw burn scars across the side of his face, possibly from chem exposure. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax, setting my mug on a crate. I reached into my Medicae satchel. I kept a few nutrient bars for long shifts. I had one left. "Here," I offered, placing the bar into his trembling hands. "Eat, and the Emperor be with you." The old man peered at the offering and gave me a grateful, toothless grin. He mumbled thanks and backed away into the shadows to devour the bar. As I picked up my recaf again, a sudden commotion echoed from the clinic's front. Raised voices. A crash. I hurried inside through the side door, adrenaline spiking. In the reception area, an enforcer officer was misculing his way through a cluster of staff. I recognised his black flak armour and crested helmet. Adeptus Arbites, not the usual local enforcer, a judge of the Emperor's law in person. What was an Arbites doing here? Behind him trailed two enforcers carrying a stretcher. On it lay a body covered by a blood-stained sheet. My gut lurched at the sight. Sabina saw me and quickly beckoned me over. The Arbites officer had removed his helmet, revealing a craggy face with a bionic eye that whirred softly. He spoke gruffly to our chief surgeon. "Found him in the lower factorum quarter. We need a Medicae report. Now." I stepped up, finding my voice. "Sir, I'm Medicae Maris. What happened?" The officer's mechanical eye focused on me with an unsettling red glare. "We don't know," he said curtly. "Likely gang violence. See for yourself. Found in a maintenance tunnel. Looks like he's been dead a few hours." Gang violence? I exchanged a troubled glance with Sabina. The Arbites wouldn't bother with a mere gang killing. Local enforcers would handle that, unless it was exceptionally gruesome, or a part of something bigger. My heart in my throat, I pulled back the sheet. Even stilled by earlier gore, I had to suppress a gasp. The victim was a young man, barely more than a boy, clad in the tatters of manufacturer uniform. His throat had been slashed so deeply that his head lolled at an unnatural angle. Blood matted his short hair. But that wasn't the worst. His torso had been cut open, a gaping incision from the septum to stomach, and inside something was missing. I leaned in, pulse pounding in my ear. Emperor save us. His heart was gone. So were several other viscera, expertly removed. A wave of horror and anger roiled in my chest. There was no haphazard butcher's work or frenzied brawl. Someone had sliced this poor lad open and taken their time extracting organs. Behind me, Sabina made a strangled noise. I quickly pulled the sheet back over the corpse to spare her the sight. The Arbites officer watched impassively, arms folded. Perhaps nothing shocked him anymore. This wasn't just gang violence, I managed to say, voice tight. It looks surgical. Who would? I bit my tongue. I was about to ask who would do such a thing, but the possible answers were endless and all terrible. The Arbites officer answered flatly. That's what we aim to find out, and why we need a detailed report, Medicae. Everything you tell us about how he died. I nodded, swallowing hard to wet my dry throat. Yes, of course. I mentioned to the orderlies to move the body to an examination table in the back. Sabina squeezed my arm, her face pale. Throne of terror, she whispered. First that accident, now this? I whispered back. This was no accident, Sabina. Someone's killing people. She crossed herself with the sign of the Aquila. Be careful, Maris. These are dark things. If it's cult work. I know, I interrupted gently. I didn't want to scare her further, but we were both thinking the same. If a cult was performing ritual killings, the entire Hive section could be purged in cleansing flame by the Inquisition. We'd heard whispers of such things happening in distant Hive cities, whole hab blocks sealed and gassed because of a handful of heretics. In the back room, under better lighting, I conducted the examination with the Arbites officer looming over me. He introduced himself, terrously, as Investigator Ruin. His presence was intimidating, but I forced myself to focus on the body. My initial observations held. Cause of death was likely the throat wound, which had nearly decapitated the victim. The precision of the dissection on the torso suggested a skilled hand, possibly someone with medical or butcher training. Despite the savagery, there was an underlying method. The heart, one lung, and the liver were removed cleanly. Whoever did this knew human anatomy well. As I dictated notes to Sabina, who insisted on assisting despite her shaken state, I noticed something else, a symbol lightly etched on the inside of the victim's forearm. I lifted the limp arm to the light. There it was, a small carving, maybe done with a fine blade. It looked like a crude spiral or tendril shape. It could have been a coincidence, a scar, or an old gang tattoo sliced off, but it struck me as deliberate. I made a note of it, heart quickening, a calling card perhaps. When we finished, Investigator Ruin took my written report and scanned it. His bionic eye whirled softly as he read, possibly recording everything. So, Medicae, your opinion, we have a killer who is harvesting organs? I flinched at how casual he made it sound. It appears so, sir. I'd venture they are either using them for illegal trade, there's a black market for augments and organs, or, I took a breath, for some kind of occult purpose. The symbol on the arm, I can't identify it, but it could be cult markings. Ruin's fleshy eye narrowed, while the red bionic one remained fixed. You've seen anything like this before? Never, I said truthfully. I read a case file once about a rogue in Tertium, Hive, who killed vagabonds for organ cloning experiments, but this feels different. He nodded slowly. We'll handle the investigation. I appreciate your cooperation, Medicae. He turned on his heel to leave, then paused. Oh, one more thing. There was another death this morning in Reclamator, Sector 16. You were there, were you not? I was caught off guard. Yes. I examined a body at the Enforcer outpost. They claimed it was an accident. Ruin's stare intensified. And what do you think? I felt a moment of fear. Was I being accused of something? But his tone was simply probing. Off the record, sir, I felt it might not have been an accident. The wounds were strange, but I couldn't be sure. The Arbites investigator considered. me for a long moment, then he said, almost to himself, 2 incidents in one day, sectors apart. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps not. He then addressed me firmly. If you observe anything else unusual, report it immediately. Understood? Yes, sir. With that, Investigator Ruin and his enforcer escort left as abruptly as they'd come, taking the butchered corpse with them. I slumped against the counter as soon as they were gone, exhaustion and dread weighing me down. Sabina stood beside me, eyes full of worry. "This is bad," she murmured. "Worse than bad," I agreed. My mind was already racing. 2 men dead in horrific ways, one tore open, another carefully carved. Could the same perpetrator have done both? The methods seemed different, savage versus surgical, yet something told me they were linked. Perhaps the first victim's death had been covered up too quickly. Sabina hugged herself as if cold. Should we do something? Warn others? Or is it better to stay quiet? Her voice quivered. She knew as I did that prying into matters of murder could draw lethal attention from the killer, or from authorities who prefer tidy silence. I rubbed my temples. The safe thing to do was keep my head down, continue tending the wounded, and let the RBTs handle it. That was what any sensible Imperial citizen would do. Duty and life in the Imperium taught us not to ask unnecessary questions. But images of the victims churned in my thoughts. If it was a killer, a cult, or a madman, they were preying on people like us. If I stayed silent, how many more would die? The Emperor may protect, but he demands we act as his hands too. Doesn't he? My conscience whirred with my fear. Finally I said, "The RBTs are on it. We should be vigilant. Avoid going anywhere alone for now, especially in the lower sectors, and if we hear anything, we pass it on to Investigator Ruin." Sabina nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "All right, Emperor, guide us." We returned to work, but the rest of the day I found it hard to concentrate. Every time a patient groaned or a tool clattered, I flinched. Shadows in the corners of the clinic seemed a little darker, as if something lurked just out of sight. Once, while cleaning up, I thought I saw a silhouette at the very edge of the door's glass window, as if someone peered in, but when I rushed to open it, the corridor was empty. Perhaps my nerves were getting the better of me. I caught only a fleeting glimpse. Maybe it was nothing. Yet, as my shift finally ended, I could not shake the feeling that an invisible thread now tied me to those awful events. Walking home through the smoke hazard corridors, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Faces in the passing crowd all looked drab and weary, ordinary, but anyone could hide terrible secrets behind dull eyes. In the darkness above, enormous exhaust fans churned, making the smog stir like living fog. The Hive's constant noise, the clanking of machines, distant shouts, a baby crying in some apartment, melded into paranoid hum in my ears. By the time I reached my hab block, I realised I'd been clutching the scrapnel in my coat pocket the whole walk back, my one feeble defence. I sighed and released it, reflexing my stiff fingers. Emperor help me, I was jumping at shadows. Little did I know the real shadows had already taken notice of me, and they were only just beginning to close in. In the days that followed, Hive Volgatis buzzed with rumours of the gruesome murders. Word spread in hushed tones of a killer who stole organs, and fear coiled in every hab block. The Administrum, loath to incite panic, responded as it often did, with a show of force. Armed enforcer patrols tripled in the lower sectors. Curfews were imposed at the slightest provocation. Loudspeaker servitors cruised the corridors, blaring, "By order of the Magistrum, all citizens must remain in designated zones after work shift. Heresy and murder will be met with the Emperor's justice." I continued my duties at the clinic, but each day felt more oppressive. Patients talked of little else besides the killings. Some wore it was a psychopath from the Underhive, others whispered of a warp-tainted monster. The official bulletin, however, claimed the Adeptus Abites were closing in on the suspect. Investigator Ruin visited the clinic twice more to ask follow-up questions, or at least that was the pretense. Each time his unnerving red eye studied me as much as I studied him. I couldn't shake the feeling that he weighed something in his mind, perhaps gauging if I knew more than I let on. In the truth, I had nothing but suspicions. But about a week after the second murder, a sudden announcement crackled over the Hive's Voxnet. Attention citizens, the killer has been found and executed. The threat is over. Return to your duties with confidence in the Emperor's peace. I was tending a line of cough-ridden miners when I heard this, and nearly dropped a vial of counterseptic. Executed? Just like that? Sabina caught my eye from across the ward, her expression as troubled as mine. Not an hour later, a grand spectacle unfolded in the central transit plaza near our clinic. Despite the anxious orders to remain at work, hundreds of people drifted toward the plaza to see proof of the killer's end. I slipped away during a lull and joined the edges of the gathering crowd, Sabina close behind. We both needed to see who had been blamed. The plaza was a carnivorous space, ringed with iron pillars and sputtering torches. As its centre stood a raised scaffold. Enforcers in riot gear formed a perimeter, shock mauls in hand to keep the crowd at bay. Perched atop the scaffold was a contraption of cruel promise, a public executioner's block beneath a massive industrial-grade lascutter. Two RBTs officiated, their black uniforms crisp, faces stony. Between them knelt a frail figure in chains, a scrawny man with wild hair and skin marred by tumours and scars, a mutant from the Underhive. He babbled and wailed, the words nonsensical, as an RBT's proctor unrolled a scroll to read the charges. Hear ye, people of Volgatis, this mutant designated Heretic XJ-17 has confessed to the heinous murders and mutilations that plagued our hive. The proctor's voice boomed metallically through his helm speaker. A lie. I could tell by the way the mutant shook and pleaded incoherently that any confession had been extracted under torture or delirium. I felt Sabina's hand slip into mine, gripping tightly. She trembled, whether in relief that someone was caught or horror at the scene. I wasn't sure. The proctor continued, by decree of Lex Imperials, sentence is death by purgation. Let all who harbour heresy or malice see their fate and despair. The Emperor's light cleanses all. At his signal, two enforcers forced the mutant's head beneath the lascutter blade. The wretch screamed, a high, kneeing sound that rang in my ears. My stomach churned. I'd seen executions before. They were not uncommon, but knowing this was likely an innocent scapegoat made it particularly cruel. With a flash of blinding light, the lascutter beam sheared downward. The mutant's scream cut off instantly. A charred smell wafted over the crowd as what remained of his body slumped, head severed cleanly by the superheat beam. A collective gasp and murmur rippled from the onlookers. Some crossed themselves and murmured prayers of thanks that the killer was caught. Others looked as sickened as I felt. I wanted to shout out that they had the wrong man, that this is pathetic. Soul could not possibly have done those cunning dissections, or the savage mutilations, but my voice stayed locked in my throat. To speak against an RBT's judgment would be suicide. Instead I turned and pushed away, through the crowd pulling Sabina with me. We rounded a corner into an emptier passage. She released my hand, face pale. Emperor, forgive them. Maris, the poor creature. He wasn't the killer, was he? I glanced around to be sure we were alone. No, I doubt it highly, but now they'll proclaim the threat ended and stop looking. Sabina, looked like she might be sick. So it's not over. We're just back to waiting for another body to turn up. Anger and helplessness twisted me inside, unless the true culprit was frightened off or left the hive, but somehow I sensed they are still here. Even as I said it, I felt eyes on my back, the hairs on my neck rising. I spun around, but the corridor behind was empty, save for a few distant passerbys. Back at the clinic, life tried to resume normally. The Arbites withdrew their heightened presence, content with the narrative of resolution. Over the next 2 days, a veneer of calm blanketed the upper levels of our district. People desperately wanted to believe the nightmare was done. Only I could not rest easy. I found myself lingering over the case notes I'd copied for my own record, rereading every detail late into my off-shift hours. The spiral symbol carved on the second victim's arm gnawed at me. I paged through an old medical lexicon and even prescribed famlet on cult markings that I had secretly acquired, a dangerous curiosity, but one I kept hidden. None matched the symbol exactly. On the third night after the execution, I stayed at the clinic late to inventory supplies, or that's what I told myself. In truth, I didn't want to walk home alone in the dark halls. Sabina had already left earlier, after evening prayer, urging me to lock up soon and get some rest. It was near the end of second shift when the front door slid open unexpectedly. I looked up from my ledger, expecting perhaps a late emergency patient. "Hello?" I called softly, stepping into the front ward. No answer. The reception area lights were dimmed, casting long shadows. A sense of wrongness prickled through me. "We are closed for the night," I said, voice hushed. A faint sound replied, a scrape, like metal on the floor, from just beyond the door. Cautiously I approached the entrance. The street outside was poorly lit, just a single flickering lumen globe in the corridor. No one was visible. Yet, as I peered out, something caught my eye on the ground, a small shape lying on the threshold. I knelt to pick it up. My heart lurched. It was a necklace, a simple silver Aquila pendant on a broken chain. Sabina's necklace. I knew it well. It had been her mother's, and she never took it off. "Sabina?" I whispered, voice trembling. I stepped fully outside, looking desperately up and down the corridor, empty. Only the old pipes hissing and a distant clank of machinery. The pendant in my palm felt like ice. There was a smear of dark liquid on the metal blood. My breath caught. Something terrible had happened. Sabina must have been on her way home. Did someone grab her? The pendant might have snapped off in a struggle. Panic and fury surged through me in equal measure. I fumbled for the clinic door control, sealing it behind me, and then took off at a run towards Sabina's usual route. It led through a narrow maintenance alley, a shortcut she often used to reach her hab. I raced down the alley's length, calling her name. Only echoes answered. About halfway I slipped on something slick and nearly fell. Regaining balance, I saw. Ground glistened with a puddle of flesh blood. Drops trailed off toward a maintenance hatch, hanging ajar in the wall, its lock shattered. There were scuff marks here, signs of struggle. Terror hammered in my chest. I peered through the hatch into the darkness beyond. A service tunnel. Faint smears of blood led further in. My mind screamed to get help. Call the enforcers. Call Investigator Ruin. Anyone. But a colder, louder voice cut through. There's no time. If Sabina was still alive, every second mattered. If I left to fetch help, she could be gone forever. I yanked a portable lantern from its hook by the hatch and stepped into the tunnel, heart thundering, hope and dread warring within me. The darkness swallowed me as the hatch swung shut, and I plunged forward into the unknown, pursuing the only lead I had on my dearest friend. The tunnel swallowed me in silence. Save for the distant drip of water and my own ragged breathing, I moved as quietly as I could, lantern held high in one hand, a shrapnel clenched in the other. My heart pounded against my ribs like a caged beast. With each step I prayed, "Emperor, let me find her in time, please." The maintenance passage sloped gently downward, deeper below the inhabited levels than I had ever ventured. The air grew colder, tinged with mildew and rot. Now and then I passed rusted pipes, leaking foul sludge, or piles of debris where parts of the hive's forgotten infrastructure lay entombed. The blood trail was faint but visible in the lantern light, a smear on a wall here, a droplet on the floor there, guiding me onward like a macabre breadcrumb trail. After several hundred meters, the passage opened into a larger utility corridor. The lantern's glow barely touched the vaulted ceiling. My footsteps echoed. I paused, straining to listen. Was that a moan? I held my breath. Yes, a faint human moan drifted from somewhere ahead to the left. I ran, no longer caring about silence. The moan came again, weak but distant. Rounding a corner, I found a heavy door slightly ajar, marked with faded letters. Mortarium. Beyond it lay darkness. The smell hit me. A nauseating blend of decay, blood, and something sweetly foul that made my head swim. I pushed through. My lantern's beam swept the room, revealing what must have been a mortuary or corpse storage chamber. Rows of slab tables and rusted gurneys filled the space. Many were overturned, and on one table in the centre, Sabina. She was splayed on the slab, wrists and ankles bound with cruel wire. Her head lolled to the side, and a gag was tied across her mouth. Blood pooled under her. I choked back a cry and rushed to her side, nearly slipping on gore as I set down the lantern. Her eyes fluttered at my approach, barely open. Relief and anguish flooded her bruised face. I tore the gag free gently. Sabina! Fro, no, I'm here, hold on! A wet cough came from her as she tried to speak. I saw now the extent of her injuries. A deep gash in her belly oozed blood, the edges cut with unnatural precision. It was horrifyingly similar to wounds on the second victim. My vision blurred, with tears as I fumbled to stem the bleeding with her shaking hands. Emperor, it was bad. Too much blood. Maris, she rasped, voice so faint I had to lean in. Her fingers twitched, trying to grasp me. I'm here, I whispered, squeezing her hand. Hot tears streaked my cheeks. You're going to be all right, just hold on. I'll get you out, I'll get help. Her head moved in tiny shakes. She knew, as I did, that her life was slipping away far too fast for any help. Her next words were almost inaudible. It was an Arbites. He... A spasm of pain cut her off, a tear leaking from her eye. I felt as if ice water had been thrown on me. An Arbites. She had seen her attacker, and I understood instantly. The only Arbites investigator around this case. Rowan. In that moment, shock turned into furious hatred. I gently touched Sabina's cheek, swallowing my sobs. I'll make him pay. I promise you. Her bloodied lips curved in the slightest ghost of a smile, or perhaps just a grimace of fading life. The Emperor protects, she breathed in a voice so soft I could barely catch it. Then her eyes lost focus, and her hand in mine went slack. The light in Sabina's kind eyes dimmed and died, leaving them staring glassy at nothing. No, no, I whimpered. I pressed my forehead to hers, my tears dripping onto her cold skin. She was gone. My dear friend, the gentlest soul I knew, snuffed out like a candle by a monster wearing a man's face. A creak of a footstep echoed behind me. I lifted my head, fury wiping aside my grief for a moment. I snatched the lantern and whirled around, rising it high to confront the darkness. Investigator Rowan stood at the edge of the lantern's glow, bolt pistol drawn casually at his side. His expression was almost regretful, but his bionic eye glinted with an eerie red light of anticipation. Blood speckled the cuffs of his Arbites coat. Truly unfortunate, Ruin said, voice echoing in the chamber. Miss Sabina stumbled where she shouldn't have, just like you, Medicae. My hands trembled, but I kept the scrapnel clenched tight. You, I spat. You did this. You killed them all. For what? Why? He tilted his head, as if considering. In the dancing light, his gaunt face looked almost skull-like. Why? Because I must. This hive is a cesspit of filth, and I offer it a higher purpose. The organs I take, the blood I spill, all is tribute to a being far greater than your corpse emperor. A chill ran through me. Rowan's voice had taken on a feverish favour. You're mad. I managed through. I knew what he truly was. A heretic. He began to circle slowly, forcing me to step back from Sabina's lifeless form. I was blind like you, bound by duty and misery, but the Dark Prince opened my eyes. I am sculpting a grand tribute from flesh and pain, a gift to beckon his gaze upon this wretched hive. His organic eye gleamed with a fanatic light while the red augment remained fixed on me. I realized with horror which Ronua's power he meant. Slaunesh, the prince of excess and agony. Rowan's pattern of murder suddenly made terrible sense. I glanced around for anything I could use as a weapon or escape. The exit lay beyond him, on a nearby tray of instruments. I spotted a heavy bone saw, likely one of his own tools. Rowan smirked at my furtive glances. You won't escape, Maris. But take heart. Your death will have meaning in his grand design. With that he lunged with terrifying speed. Pistol rising, a crack split the air as a bolt round blasted past my ear, exploding a column behind me. I ducked and bolted behind a gurney. Another shot blew the corner off. The slab I'd crouched behind, showering me with fragments. Snarling in frustration, Rowan holstered his firearm. He drew a long knife from his belt, the mono-edged blade gleaming wickedly. Come out, little Medicae, he taunted, advancing. My heart hammered. I seized the lantern from the floor and with shaking hands hurled it toward him. He threw up an arm. The lantern stuck and shattered, plunging the far side of the room in darkness and splattering burning promethium. Flames whooshed up in a sudden blaze, casting wild shadows. Taking advantage of his momentary distraction, I lunged for the tray of implements. My fingers closed around the bone saw's handle. Rowan vaulted over a fallen table with animal speed, knife arcing towards me. I met his swing with the saw, steel screeched on steel as I parried desperately. He was strong, far stronger than me. The impact jarred my arms and sent pain screaming through my wounded shoulder. I fell back, barely ducking a follow-up slash. The tip of his knife sliced a hot line across my upper arm, but missed the fatal mark. Desperate, I swung the bone saw wildly. By sheer luck, the serrated edge bit into the side of Rowan's neck where flesh met the rim of his carapace armor. He bellowed in agony and rage, staggering. His gauntlet fist lashed out and caught the side of my head. Stars burst across my vision as I was knocked to the floor, ears ringing. My weapon clattered away. Blinking through pain, I saw Rowan clutching his neck. Blood poured between his gloved fingers, yet, with sheer will he loomed toward me, knife still in his other hand, his lips peeled back in a rictus of hatred. I scrambled backward, my hand brushing over broken lantern glass slick with fuel. My fingers closed around a jagged shard. As Rowan raised his blade for a final strike, I flung myself forward from the ground, driving the shard up beneath his jaw with a hoarse scream. The glass punctured deep. Rowan's one good eye bulged. A horrible wet choking noise gurgled from his throat as blood filled his mouth. The knife slipped from his grasp, clanging to the ground. He swayed, the fight draining from his body. A final rasp escaped his lips as he toppled, first to his knees, then collapsing face down at my feet. His augmentic eye flickered and went dark. For a long moment I just knelt there, shaking, staring at the fallen Arbites. Flames crackled behind me. The spilled promethium had ignited scraps of cloth and old paper, and now as a fire was spreading through the abandoned monetary, smoke coiled thickly toward the ceiling. I staggered to my feet, every injury screaming in protest. It was over. The killer, the heretic, lay dead, his lifeblood mingling with that of the victims on the floor. A faint, uncanny whisper seemed to sigh through the burning room, like the departing breath of something vile. I fenced in the dying gasp of whatever profane force had driven ruin, slipping back the immerterium. Perhaps it was only the fire's hiss. Either way, the evil presence had been purged from the Hive Volgatis this night. My knees nearly buckled with exhaustion and pain, but I forced myself onward. I returned to Sabina's still form and gently lifted her into my arms. My tears had dried, replaced by a hollow ache. The fire intensified, embers drifting around us, with a final look at the monastery that had been Investigator ruins, now just a corpse amid the flames. I carried Sabina out in the tunnel. Each step away from the charnel house was agony, my leg and shoulder wounds throbbing, smoke searing my lungs, but I kept on, driven by grim resolve and the faint hope of daylight at the end of this nightmare journey. Behind us, the mortuary chamber was engulfed in flame, its horrors cleansed by purifying fire. Ahead, a pinprick of light beckoned, the distant glow of the inhabited hive levels. I held Sabina close as I limped forward, whispering broken fragments of the Emperor's prayers. For the both of us, in the end, only the two of us bore witness to the darkness that had unfolded beneath Hive Volgatis, and only I remained to remember.